All right, welcome. Draft day round two. We got some trades to talk about. It's been kind of crazy the past 24 hours in terms of trades. On this board is all the players that have been involved in trades, not including picks that have been swapped and so on. Um, and I got my Locust hat on because it's kind of wild, some of these trades. I also got my Coyotes jersey on. It is a fake, so I do apologize, but I love this jersey and it can't get a hold of one right now. Um, because I kind of like what Utah's done, and I don't have any Utah gear yet. Can't wait for that to go on sale because I will be getting some. But let's dive into this. We're starting off. We're going back. I think this is the day before draft day. Flames Caps make a trade. Flames get a second round pick for next year's draft. They also give the Capitals Andrew Mangiapane at a cap hit of $5.8 million for this next year, and then he's an unrestricted free agent. The Flames now have $29 million in cap space, which I think is huge. I know a lot of people are looking at all the moves the Flames have made and kind of scratching their heads and being like, what are they doing? Are they rebuilding? Are they committing to the rebuild? Are they retooling? I think they're doing a slight retool. They're dumping off some bad contracts. Maybe some cap heavy contracts, and they're freeing themselves up for a decent off season. They got a lot of cap space, which is fantastic. What's it called? Mangiapane, about a 40 to 50 point a season kind of guy. Kind of a middle six winger. He one season a few years ago he got off to a really hot start. He was one of the best goal scorers in the league, and that really fell off. He finished the season with 35 goals. His entire career he hasn't finished above 20. He hasn't even got to the 20 goal mark since. So it's an interesting move. Is the Mangiapane cap hit a bit much for Washington to take on? Sure. But Calgary gets a second round pick in exchange for kind of a cap dump, which I think is pretty good. Mangiapane, solid player. I think he'll fit well in Washington. I think that'll help bolster their offense. They had an issue scoring goals. I kind of just want to talk about this trade more because it's kind of intriguing, and you can look at it as a positive for both sides, and you can look at it as kind of like, what are you doing for both sides? But I kind of like it for both teams. Next up, Jackets acquire a fourth round pick in next year's draft for Texier. He is a restricted free agent. Bottom six kind of guy, plays a lot of fourth line minutes. I think he had a career high, was it 30? Maybe it was 21 points last year. So he's all right. He works hard every shift. I like Texier, but a fourth round pick, it's about right. Next up, we got the Sabres and the Capitals. The Sabres acquire Beck Malenstein, who's a restricted free agent from the Capitals in exchange for a 2024 this round, so this already happened, second round pick. I like Malenstein a lot. He's a pretty solid defensive defenseman. He's still pretty young, right? But he's got the defensive side of the game down. He's working on his offensive side of the game. I think a second round pick is not an overpay at all. I think a first round pick might be overpay, so maybe a second round pick's about right. At the same time, I think this is a great pickup for the Sabres. Get some stability on that blue line. Play them more. Help the blue off. They have a lot of offensive defenders in Buffalo. Help kind of secure that defensive defense in front of their own goaltender because they do need help defending in front of their own net. I think Malenstein will be huge for them. He was fantastic for the Capitals this past season. He was really fun to watch. I think it was a good pickup for the Sabres, and I think it's not an overpay. Moving on, Devils. Devils get 2 second-round picks, one for this year, one for next year's draft. Going to Utah, John Marino, defenseman, getting paid $4.4 million a year for the next 3 seasons. That starts this upcoming season. They also get a 5th-round pick in this year's draft. So Utah, I had some questions when they drafted Tijagin at 6th. A forward. 6 is fine for a guy like Iginla. I don't dive too much into I follow the prospects a lot, but I think it's still a little soon to have intense opinions on these guys. And Iginla kind of falls in line with where he was projected to go. Maybe a couple picks earlier, but it is what it is, right? He's going to be a great NHL player. But I like Utah has so many forwards and so many highly touted young forwards on their roster. I was kind of thrown off that they didn't go defenseman. There are a lot of pretty solid defensemen available at 6. They kind of had their pick, with the exception of one or maybe two guys. So I was confused why they weren't helping out their defensive core. Aside from, who do they have? They have Simishev. Is he there? They don't have a whole lot of defensive prospects at the end of the day. So John Marino can play a solid defensive style of hockey, which I kind of think they need. I think is kind of addresses a need for them. I think this is a great pickup for Utah. Bit of an overpay, sure. 2 second-round picks for John Marino is probably a little much. But at the same time, Utah has money to spend. They have the assets that are disposable, essentially. They're starting to build up. They're starting to kind of make a push for the playoffs, and I don't hate it. I like the John Marino pickup. I think he's, I think he got a lot of hate last year, and I don't think you can pit it on one player, and I don't think all the blame was on John Marino last year. But John Marino, pretty solid defensive defenseman, especially when he's in a good organization. I think Utah's building that. So interesting trade there, but I do like this trade. Moving on to probably the biggest trade we've seen. Utah gets another defenseman in Mikhail Sergachev. We'll talk about that. He signed for 7 more years at a cap hit of $8.5 million. He has a full no-trade clause for the next 3 seasons, and then it's a modified no-trade clause for the rest of his contract. In exchange, the Bolts get defenseman J.J. Moser. He's a restricted free agent, has to be signed. They get prospect forward Connor Geekie. They get a 7th-round pick in this year's draft, and they get a 2nd-round pick in next year's draft. Now, again, similar to the John Marino deal, I do think Utah overpaid just a bit to get Sergachev. I know a lot of people are high on Sergachev. I'm kind of indifferent. I think he kind of falls in line on that second line pairing defenseman. It really depends which season of Sergachev you get. Is he going to be more offensively oriented? Is he going to be more defensively oriented? And there are trade-offs for both. When he's offensively oriented, you're not getting the elite defense that he probably could provide you, and vice versa, right? If you're getting good defense from Sergachev, you're getting almost no offensive production or very minimal. And I think for Sergachev, he has to find a balance. I do think when this contract was signed, I still think it's a bit of an overpay in terms of the contract and the cap hit. But at the end of the day, Tampa wanted to keep their guys around, and I got it. But it doesn't surprise me they had to move on from one of the higher paid players they extended, and Sergachev seems to be a casualty of that. On the other hand, Utah really needs to bolster up their defense. John Marino, Sergachev really make that defensive core a lot better. And I think these were good moves for them. Again, this is $13 million, $12.9 million in total cap hits they're taking on in a matter of a day. But they have so much cap space they can afford it. And I don't hate this trade. Now, Tampa does very well. J.J. Moser, I think, is a pretty underrated defenseman, more of a defensive defenseman. Pretty solid in his own zone, not going to command a huge pay increase. Connor Geekie, was he the 11th overall pick from Arizona? Connor Geekie was a very highly touted prospect, and it was almost looked at, I think, don't quote me on this, it's been a few years, but I think it was more viewed as kind of a steal in the draft. He was supposed to go a little higher than 11th, where Arizona got him. But in reality, he's playing well. He's still in the WHL, playing very well. But I don't know if he's gonna live up to that hype. We'll see how his game translates to the NHL. But I'm not confident at this point in saying he's a surefire top 6 guy. I think ideally, given his play in the WHL, just looking at his stats, he's probably slotting in somewhere in that middle 6. And again, we'll see how that transition to the NHL goes. It could go great. It could go poorly. It could be just about right. So we'll see what happens. But it's an interesting pick, right? Interesting prospect to pick up, and it definitely helps the prospect pool of Tampa, which they need a lot of help with. There's not a whole lot of prospects in Tampa, right? They got a 7th-round pick, which is fine, and they got a 2nd-round pick for next year. And that 2nd-round pick, you never know. There have been plenty of gems that come out of 2nd rounds, so it's interesting. I do think, again, I know I'm repeating myself. I do think Utah overpaid just a bit to get Sergachev, especially considering the cap hit. But at the end of the day, I think this is a trade that kind of works out for both teams, right? Defenseman for defenseman. JJ Moser will provide a little more stability on that blue line. I don't want to say more stability over Sergachev, but will provide more defensive stability. With the, it's not making sense. That's not making sense. So I do apologize. With Sergachev gone, I think JJ Moser still helps that blue line with that hole of Sergachev being gone. That's where my brain was at. Moving on. Kings, Bolts. Kings get Tanner Jeannot, the guy that we'll talk about that. He signed for one more year at $2.665 million. Bolts get a 4th round pick from this year and a 2nd round pick for next year. On the surface, Jeannot is a physical, big 4th line player who can contribute offensively here and there, but shouldn't be relied on for offensive production. Pretty solid in his own zone. Defensively, he's pretty solid, right? But again, at the end of the day, for a 4th line guy, given a 2nd and a 4th round pick too, been a bit of an overpay. I'd have him more pegged around maybe a 3rd round pick, and that's it. But nonetheless, I do think the Kings overpay for Jeannot. But this is the same guy that Tampa acquired from Nashville. They gave up, who was it? Cal Foote, defenseman Cal Foote, a 1st round, 2nd round, 3rd round, 4th round, and 5th round pick for Tanner Jeannot. So even when you factor in all of kind of the overpay from the Kings, the Bolts still lose a 1st round, 3rd round, 5th round pick, and a defenseman in Cal Foote who is serviceable at the NHL level. So I don't know. Maybe GM see something different in Tanner Jeannot's play than I see, but I think he's good. I think there is upside, but how much is that upside? And is it probably just a 3rd line at best? And does he ever reach that? Because he didn't reach that potential in Tampa. I don't know. So there's that. Not quite sure what the Kings are trying to accomplish here, but it is what it is. Moving on. Blues, cap dump. Blues get future considerations. It's our favorite player. It's everyone's favorite player to be traded. Future considerations. Penguins get Kevin Hayes at a cap hit of $3.57 million for 2 more seasons. Because it's a cap dump from the Blues, they also get a 2nd round pick in next year's draft. Kevin Hayes kind of had a rough season over in St. Louis. Didn't quite fit that system, but is capable of putting up 50-plus points a year. He's pretty talented. He's, you kind of know what you're going to get with Kevin Hayes most seasons, with the exception of last year in St. Louis. So it's a player that can contribute offensively in Pittsburgh. I think that will help Pittsburgh a bit, and they pick up a 2nd round pick because it's a cap dump, which I think is fine. We'll see how Kevin Hayes does this next year in Pittsburgh, and see kind of what goes on there. But we're moving down to the Capitals and the Vegas Golden Knights. This is an interesting one. The Capitals get goaltender Logan Thompson. Logan Thompson was in that Calder race talk not too long ago. He's a young goaltender. Plays very solid goaltending at the NHL level. I like Logan Thompson a lot. He has 1 year left at $766,000 in a cap hit. Going the other way, the Knights get 2 3rd round picks, 1 for this year, 1 for next year. Knights, they have Aiden Hill. I don't know what's going on with Robin Lehner, if he's going to come back. I haven't really looked up any updates, so I may be out of the loop on that. Just being completely transparent there. But they're pretty set in goaltending. You can usually go out and find a backup goalie for $1 million and a half and be okay. There will be backups available on the market. There'll be plenty of backups this offseason. So for Vegas, you have your starting goaltender, Logan Thompson, kind of an odd man out. I'd expect Logan Thompson to kind of be like a 1A, 1B with Charlie Lindgren in Washington. Both are capable of being starting NHL goaltenders, but when you factor in workload, how much is manageable for both guys? Logan Thompson could very well take over that number 1 job from Charlie Lindgren, depending on how this year plays out. I don't hate this move for the Caps. I kind of like it. especially because they traded Darcy Kemper. You get Logan Thompson back for a couple third-round picks. I think that's fine, right? Still young, very solid at the NHL level. Could potentially continue to blossom into your future number one goaltender. And then if we're looking back when this guy's in the Vezina conversation, should that happen, this is going to look like an absolute steal. So I think the upside is definitely there to justify the cost. I don't hate this at all. Capitals are going to look for every single win they can get to get back into the playoffs while they still have Ovechkin and some of these older players, TJ Oshie, while they still have John Carlson, right? So that, having a backup goaltender who, I mean, even if they split starts, having a goaltender that can play 20 plus games and keep you in the game and give you a chance to win every night is important. I think Logan Thompson will more than be able to provide that. Last up, minor trade, Bruins Wild. They exchanged fourth round picks from this year. They also exchanged fourth line players in Vinny Lettieri going to Boston and Jacob Lauko going to the Minnesota Wild. Of the two players, I do have to say that Lauko is the better player. Lettieri, very fringe AHL, NHL player. Lettieri, a lot of energy, a lot of speed. Shorter guy, got a decent shot. Lauko, a little more physical, a little more gritty. Still got some speed, right? But can kind of get in those gritty areas in front of the net. So it's interesting. I'm not quite sure why you make this trade. Neither player really needed a change of scenery at the end of the day. So I don't know. But it is what it is, right? Bruins moving up, so maybe and they give up the better of the two players in the fourth round. So I don't know if a few picks are worth that much of a difference, but it is what it is. We'll see how it plays out. You're all caught up with the trades. I'm all caught up with the trades. I'm sure there'll be more trades coming out, and if there aren't, we got free agency in 2 days. Today is the 29th. Tomorrow is June 30th, and then July 1st, free agency starts. So it'll get quite interesting in the near future with the NHL. It's been a fun few days, and I'm sure the fun will continue. So, that's all I got. Let me know what you think. Who won? You like what Utah did? Do you like what the Capitals are doing? I don't hate it. I had some questions when they started making moves, especially when they acquired Mangiapane. I was a little like, what are we doing here? And then they made a few other moves, and now I kind of understand. But at the same time, they're losing Malenstein for a second-round pick. I like Malenstein. They kind of have a busy blue line, but they're always looking for defensive depth. They had to call up Iorio and, is that his name? Iorio? And McElrath last year. Both played fine, but at the same time, I still think you need a little more depth on that blue line. Some of those guys are able to call up, but free agency's around the corner, and there'll be plenty of those guys to sign. So we'll see, but I am very high on Malenstein. I think this is a great pickup for Buffalo. What do you think of the Tanner Jeannot deal? The Lightning's asset management. I don't really know what's going on with Tanner Jeannot. Sergachev to Utah, John Marino to Utah. The Bolts getting Connor Geekie. Are you still high on Connor Geekie? He had just about 100 points in the WHL last year in, 57 games? So still fantastic production. But, he's getting a little older. He's an older player in the WHL now, a higher scoring Canadian Hockey League. So how is that going to translate to the NHL? We'll see. You let me know. I appreciate you. Appreciate your time. Take care, right?